We are very honored today to have George Andrews. He's a senior mathematics philosophy double major at UALR, and he started the Ethics Bowl at UALR, which has done very well, has made a trip or two to nationals, he said. So without further ado, please welcome George Andrews.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank Susan for helping organize this and giving me a chance to speak today to you all. I'm going to be speaking about the Ethics Bowl, which is an intercollegiate competition where students engage in a moral discourse on serious issues that happen in our society. And we're going to discuss one of those today. But when we go to Ethics Bowl, we don't really know what cases are going to be there. We're given 15 cases at the beginning of the semester. We have about 2 months to prepare before the Ethics Bowl. And we have to prepare for each of these cases. We don't know what question's going to be asked, and we don't know which cases are going to be we're going to have to go over. So we go into the competition blind. And so whenever we examine one of the cases, we have to we try to find every ethical issue in the case. We don't always succeed, and sometimes we focus too much on what may not be the ethical issue that they actually ask a question about. So in light of that, we prepare for every question as well as we can. And so in each case, I handed out one of the cases at the before the talk, but for each case, there may be several questions we have to answer. In this case, there's 4 questions that I identified on the back of the handout. But there's more questions than this even. And it can be, at times, really difficult to find the right position. Sometimes it's easy to see through intuition what it seems like is going to be the correct position to have. But sometimes you get there through the wrong reasoning. And so the goal of Ethics Bowl is to have the best position by the best reasons that we can. And so what's really important in this is that a lot of people have arguments in everyday life with other people about different issues. But we have to ground this in Ethics Bowl with ethical theory and ethical reasoning so that we can really justify why we think the good that we're arguing for is actually the good. And so I've also outlined 3 of the ethical theories that we use quite often. One of the really common ethical theories you'll hear people use, and they may not call it this, but often people use utilitarianism, which is the idea that we should create the greatest good or the least suffering. It can be seen both ways. But the greatest good for the most people, the least suffering for the most people. And that's, it's really easy to apply. It's just a calculus. There's another ethical theory that's really useful, which is deontology. Deontology was founded by Immanuel Kant, and it's the idea that you should follow your duties in every situation, and you derive those duties. He doesn't like deontology. Oh, good. Deontology. You derive your duty from the categorical imperative. So the categorical imperative is that you should act in accordance with those maxims which you can at the same time will be universal. So you have to be able to universalize any code of conduct you used to follow. And you won't be able to universalize it if it somehow leads to a contradiction or it undermines your position in society. And sometimes it's very useful to see some of the ethical dimensions of a case that utilitarianism fails to see, because there are certain principles that we do follow that can be justified using deontology that you can't justify with utilitarianism, because utilitarianism is always contextualized. It's always case by case. The third and probably least used ethical theory is virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is the idea that in any action in your life that you're doing, I'll use drinking as an example. So if you drink, you can drink a whole lot all the time, and that's too much. That's a vice. Or you can never drink at all and totally deprive yourself of drinking. And that is a deprivation in a way. And so virtue ethics would say that you need to find a moderation, a healthy amount of drinking if that's something you want to do. And so virtue ethics is all about the golden mean. The average way that you should act is the ethical thing. Like the way that you're not depriving yourself of anything at the same time you're not committing, you're not being excessive. And so these are the main ethical theories we use. There are some others, but I won't talk about those. And so we're going to talk about this case, the case of Brendan Eich. He was the CEO of Mozilla, and he gave $1,000 to Proposition 8 in California. Proposition 8 says that marriage is only lawful between a man and a woman. So it was a ban on gay marriage. And he was forced out of the company. He was forced out of his position as CEO because his views were not in line with that of the company. And there's a law in California that mandates that you can publicize any campaign contributions over $100. So he gave a $1,000 contribution, and so it was made public. I can't remember which newspaper exactly made it public, but there was a newspaper that published a whole lot of people's campaign contributions, and his was one of them. And so he was kind of ostracized for it. And then another thing that happened in this case is that OkCupid, the dating website, blocked users that were using Firefox and asked them to use a different browser because they wanted their platform to be an open platform and they believed in equality. And so to support that, and knowing that Brendan Eich had supported something counter to their position, they asked users on Firefox to use another browser. Although this was just a pop-up, they weren't blocked from the site. They were able to click past the prompt and go onto the website even if they were using Firefox. So they weren't actually blocking Firefox users. The case doesn't actually say that, but when we're doing one of these cases, we have to go through and do research. And so that was one of the things we found in research. It's actually in one of the links on the handout. So in this case, we have to identify first what the ethical issues are in the case. And there's probably several ethical issues that I didn't mention on the handout, but we may talk about some of them. And then we try to come up with the strongest position using ethical reasoning. And we have to use these theories. That's what separates the ethics bowl from a debate team. So debate teams go in and they have lots of facts and they argue these things, and they do well. I'm sure they do things I can't do, but we have to justify everything. It's very philosophically oriented, and it's really part of academic ethical discourse is what it's orienting itself towards. And so I've described the case. So we could ask a few different questions. Is it ethical? Is what Brendan Eich did ethical? Is Mozilla forcing Eich out of the company ethical? Is having a law that mandates that campaign contributions are publicized ethical? Or did OkCupid act ethically in publicizing what Eich did and asking their Firefox users to use another browser? Some of these questions are relevant. The is Eich acting ethically question, I imagine most people would agree that he's probably not acting ethically. Although, I'll leave it to others to make that argument. The question we zeroed in on was it okay for Mozilla to force Eich out? Although that's not the question they asked at the competition. We actually went over this case and they asked about OkCupid. And we were really ready for the question about Mozilla and Eich, and we didn't get it. And it kind of threw us off. But also, most of these questions are formulated in a more neutral format. And so it's tempting to sometimes ask questions in a really leading fashion. And so we try to avoid that because we're trying to get to really the root of the problem. We don't want to ask ourselves questions that are going to lead us to a solution arbitrarily. And so one of the questions you could ask is, was it ethical for Mozilla and OkCupid to reduce Ike's freedom of speech? So that question already implies that his freedom of speech has been stifled by Mozilla and by OkCupid. But that's a leading question. It's already loaded. It's already got tons of assumptions in it. And so we try to refrain from using questions like that and use more neutral questions so that we can come to a stronger position. And if someone does come to us with some of these assumptions that are implied in this question, we'll have answers for them because we've properly prepared, instead of preparing for a question that is already biased in a way. And so I'd like to ask you all, do you think that it is ethical for Mozilla to push Ike out? Does anyone, is it good or bad that his actions outside of the company affected his employment? Does anyone? Scott Austin, everyone.
Well, consider if that was some other position that maybe you even agreed with. Would you like your employer to kick you out based on that position?
What if I said that by taking that position publicly, he wasn't actually fulfilling his obligations as a CEO? I'm not saying it was in his contract. I don't know what was in his contract. But the CEO does tend to be a representative for the company. So if we think of the CEO as an executive for the company, making big decisions, but also as a representative.
Well, was that their representative position going into this?
I'm actually not sure. But it was very publicized that the CEO of Mozilla took this position. And so he was representing the company, whether or not it was his job or whether or not he was designated to do that, he was actually misrepresenting the company by being the person in the highest position of authority in that company and having, I wouldn't say he publicly took the position, but it was made public that he did take the position, and it was his responsibility to know that the information could be made public.
Do you automatically lose your rights as a citizen to donate to political causes simply because you join a company?
That's a good question. And it does seem like it would depend on what your explicit obligations are to that company. But I can't imagine, it seems like given what a company is there to do, which is to make money, I can't imagine them holding an employee on that's damaging the company. So it may not be explicit, but isn't it implicit that you're not supposed to damage the company you work for? Like I'm not, like if I was working, I did work for a company that I would have liked to have slandered. But I didn't, because I knew I would be, putting my employment in danger, and I would be betraying the company because they are doing something for me, giving me a job. Jim? Oh.
Go ahead. I think it depends real strongly on how the company was organized, who was it that was forcing them out. Are these stockholders? Mozilla was an unusual corporation, just right from the beginning. If these were people who were employees who owned a bunch of stock in the company, then they had a perfect right to decide what direction that company was going to take. There's nothing in here that says what their position was with respect to the company. Are they just employees? Are they owners of the company? Certainly the owners have a right to decide whether the CEO represents a position that they like or not. This is done all the time with corporations. So the stockholders decide, we don't want that guy as CEO anymore and vote him out.
Right. And it does say that Ike resigned under pressure from employees, consumers, and board members. So I imagine that the board members were the most influential in getting him removed from his position, because they were actually another tier of authority in the company.
Do you know what the situation was with Mozilla? Just from the history of it, it wouldn't surprise me if it was one of those companies that was owned mostly by the employees. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I don't think, I didn't read anywhere that it was. But it may be. I think you can buy and sell stock and like everything else. I think it's a fairly normal corporation, or normal by our standards. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I think it seems to me a lot of it would be dependent upon the corporate, I want to say code, their, what they stand for. I mean, they've got a, what's it called? Mission statement, yes. What would their mission statement be? And we talked about there being negative, shall we say PR. Well, like abortion or pro-life, pro-life or pro-choice. I mean, those are two different ends of the spectrum, and you're going to have people going after it from both ends. People on the pro-life and the pro-choice end are both going to be going, hey, yeah, that's good or that's bad. So, it probably goes back to their mission statement, I would think, as to what they're wanting to promote. And does this go along with it? I mean, they're going to get advertising. They're going to get promotional advantage out of it or disadvantage out of it, whichever way they look at it.
Well, Mozilla did come out in favor of equality. So they were basically saying that this isn't actually our position. We are advocating for equal treatment for all peoples. And so they identified Ike as taking a position counter to their own. Susan?
Well, listening to you and then reading this, did Ike know that when he gave that $1,000 personally, that it was going to have a negative effect on the company? And he probably did not know how far it was going to go. And then, so my problem with the whole thing is that all these questions, all of them seem to me, and my own personal experiences, all of them seem fine except Mozilla forcing him out. But I don't know all the details. I don't know what was in his contract. I don't know if they tried to talk to him about it. I don't know if he tried to keep it secret, and then, like you said, the law caused it to be made public. What was the discussion afterwards? Would he not? Maybe they had something they wanted him to say and he wouldn't say it. And so I guess in the future what they would need to do is make sure that their CEO realizes that they're a public figure, like a movie star, they can be quoted, and that they're a public figure, and that whatever they do is going to represent the company and could cause them to lose their position.
Right, I think that's a really good point. And that's actually, that's the side that we came down on, I believe, if I remember right. Is that it may have been the case that he had no idea this would happen. But I don't know that we can excuse him of that, because there's two reasons. One is that there are a lot of CEOs that have been public figures or have functioned as public figures for companies, and campaigning is a public act. You're trying to convince others of your position, and you're taking a public stance on something. And so although he may not have known that it would happen, it was his responsibility, and he should have been aware that he may be under scrutiny. And also, the law is not a secret. And so the law that was in place that allowed the publication of these campaign contributions, it was his job to know that that was a possibility.
I was just going to say, from a deontological point of view, we had a person who was in our Facebook group who relayed a story of working at Hobby Lobby and being fired for being a freethinker. And so that maybe is the flip side, where you have the attitudes are flipped, but also the power role is flipped, because instead of CEO, this person is a retail worker. And in theory, both the CEO and the retail worker present a face for the organization, and if the organization's mission is to go in one way or another, the organization, I guess, could justify firing people who don't fit that mold. And I think that the whole practice kind of leads us in a troubling direction, because eventually, you have organizations that want to present a white face, or want to present a certain ethnicity as at their core, or stores at the mall that will only hire people up to a certain age because they want to appeal to teenagers. It's kind of just troubling for a lot of those reasons.
I mean, I think you raised some good points, for sure. The biggest difference I see is the magnitude of representation that Ike had, or that a CEO has, versus a retail worker. And so it seems less justifiable to fire a retail worker because they don't agree with your stance. But I mean, I think there are examples of this. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I think is it Chick-fil-A won't let you open a franchise unless you express some certain religious beliefs.
Can I have one comment about, everybody knows there's a Fair Labor Standard set of laws that do protect regular employees, and those are all spelled out in detail, but there is exemption for high-level management and director-level people. So it's really two totally different conversations. You really can't get away with that sort of thing with your protected employees, but it gets to be much cloudier when it's at that CEO level, and particularly since this guy was so involved in the establishment of the thing. So, I guess we could talk hypothetically about CEOs, but the issue of lower level employees, I think, is pretty irrelevant to the real bottom line of the issue. Just because the law is there, they're going to be protected. That's probably why the law is there.
Right. And I mean, I agree with that. But this is the kind of muddy water you get into on these cases, is where is the distinction? When is it okay for people who are holding a different standard than the company would like to hold? At what point can they be held accountable for that by the company? Do you have a question?
Yeah, so if he would have contributed money against Prop A, that is the complete opposite stance that he took, even though Mozilla didn't have an official stance on the issue, I mean, this would not even have been a problem? Or
if Mozilla is being genuine when they say that they believe in equality and that this is something they want to advocate for, then no, it wouldn't have. This could just bring up a question about corporations in general. It's like, how trustworthy can you expect a corporation to be? It may be that if it was bad publicity, they would have said one way or the other, but we can't know whether or not, and so we're kind of limited to taking it at face value, because we. Okay. Sorry about that. Start over from the beginning. So we'll have some audio in and out.
I can read lips.
But there's a really interesting connection between what, this is one thing I wanted to mention in the talk at some point. There's a really interesting connection between the actions of Mozilla and the actions of OkCupid. And so Mozilla, in asking Ike to leave the company, they're taking a political position more than anything. I mean, it would have been apolitical for them to have said, we don't agree or disagree with Ike's position. It doesn't affect his job, and so we're not going to take any action. But they took a position, and so it was political, and OkCupid did a very similar thing. And so there's another question we could ask, which is it ethical for someone who supports what they believe in to face this sort of public scrutiny from individuals on social media, which happened? There were some people saying really nasty things about Ike, from corporations like OkCupid, and from within Mozilla. So it seems as though they rise and fall at the same time, because both corporations are taking public stances on political issues. OkCupid, by asking their Firefox users to use a different browser, and then Mozilla by pressuring Ike to resign. And so I would like to ask the question to the audience, does it seem like Ike was treated fairly in general? Like, was it okay for him to face this kind of scrutiny? And if it was okay for him to face this kind of scrutiny, why was it, and where is the line? Is it okay for OkCupid? Is it not okay for the public?
Well, I was going to, I guess I'll kind of say something about that and what I was going to say. One of the things that when Lisa said if they had come out, if he'd come out against Proposition 8 and had donated money, I think that the same thing might have happened with OkCupid, because they still would have called him out on it. They would have called the company out on it. They would have had people boycott it because the company had come out in support and not in support of Proposition 8, because that happened all over California with the people who were in support of it. They boycotted businesses and websites, and people really strong-armed people to go vote in support of Proposition 8. I think I'm saying that right.
Are you saying that OkCupid would have?
You still might have had the same outcome if Mozilla had come out and not in support and said, we don't agree with this proposition, don't vote for it, and where Ike had given money in support of it, that they might have still had the same strong-arm tactics from OkCupid, where they would have told people to boycott their product. Because that happened all over California, and that's why it passed, is because of that strong arm. And that just goes to show how people have pull and can cause uprisings and cause people to boycott things. But as far as it being fair to him, I still would need to know more about what he knew when he did it. You know, was that an expected outcome? I mean, I could have seen if he had donated $100,000 of money, but $1,000, that's an awfully big. And could they have disciplined him instead of terminating it? Maybe they needed to let it blow over, but was it going to blow over, or was it just snowballing?
I mean, I think that's a really good question. But if I try to imagine from Mozilla's perspective, that it would seem as though they're condoning his action if they didn't take some action, like with respect to Ike. If they tried to ignore it, it may have seemed as if they were coming out in support of Proposition 8.
I think treatment was fair because he's the most public image of the company, right? I mean, the CEO is typically the face of the company. What he comes out and says. And so in that regard, I think he did get treated fairly, because he knows that it's a controversial issue, and so he's putting a face on the company of wanting to discriminate against rights, right?
Right. But I guess let's take it, let's imagine that he didn't know, like Susan's been saying. Like, imagine that he didn't know, and then all of a sudden, he has all these people saying terrible things about him. And I'm not accusing OkCupid of this, but I'm accusing people on social media, because that's some of the things that happen on social media. Is he was, you know, I imagine he was called a bigot several times. So I guess what I'm saying is try to imagine yourself in that position, and does it seem fair to be ostracized in that way for doing what he may sincerely believe is the right thing to do?
You have a right to express your beliefs, but you also have to be willing to pay whatever consequences comes from that, if you know, especially if you know how your company stands with that, or if you get up in the middle of a Baptist church and proponent of freedom of choice, you might expect to get stoned.
Right, I see what you're saying. I lost my train of thought.
Well, I think, you know, you have two different things going on here. You got the individual right and the individual's right to free speech, and then the corporation's code of ethics or whatever, mission statement, shall we say. And I think one thing is how much of a stir, was it a big stir that was caused by all of this, and did it get to the point to where the individual had affected Mozilla as well, which evidently it did, I guess. But I guess that's the real question: is the individual does the individual have the right to have free speech, regardless of what the how it might affect other people? And certainly in this situation, obviously, with their mission statement, or what we suppose was their mission statement and everything, it seems like he overstepped his bounds.
All right. So there's a sense in which he's could be said to be harming the people in the company, in all tiers of the company.
Yeah. Let me ask you something about the ethics competition that you're going to. When you're in the competition, are you able to get more information from them on the case and such? Are you able to ask questions and such?
We are supposed to do our own research. So whatever research we can bring into the case is good. This case has a bibliography, or it has citations. And so generally we always check all of those, and then if we can find other websites that talk about it, or other places to find information, then we'll do that, and we'll bring in whatever information we can, because sometimes the cases are worded in such a way that they lead you to believe something that isn't actually the case.
Well, now you're giving these on the spur of the moment, though. Is that correct? Or do you have Google?
We don't have anything.
Search all
we
this.
have sheets of paper and pencils, and that's all we're able to bring into the competition. And water. It's nice to have water. Yes, we're given 15 cases, and we're able to prepare for all of those cases. So we bring research in, but we bring it in with memory. If we forget something about the case, then we just lose that information and we can't use it.
Well, related to that, what's the timeline here? So Mozilla lets this guy go, but then there's this boycott. Which came first? Was there the boycott and then he was let go?
The boycott was first.
The boycott was first.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of the pressure issue there.
Yeah, the boycott was part of the reaction to it being found out that he took that position.
Okay.
Or,
I don't know who had it first. There's someone over there. Yeah, I'll go. I think it's important that we separate, the law from ethics, because as the gay marriage issue illustrates, the law and ethics are two different questions, because, regardless of your stance, you can find a situation where the law disagrees with your sense of ethics. And so it's not a case of who would win a lawsuit here. If Ike sued Mozilla for unlawful termination or whatever, probably in his contract it says something vague about don't make us look bad, or don't do something that might cost us customers or jobs or something like that. But so I think the ethics of it is should employers who have economic and job power over you be able to fire you for having your opinion? And legally, the answer is, yeah, you have the right to speak and they have the right to fire you, but ethically, it's maybe a little more complicated.
Absolutely. And there's several different ways to go about tackling the case.
Pretty much what he said. It's a complex issue, and ethically, it's like you're trying to, like you said, you're wading through muddy water, and you're trying to find the shore somehow, and that's tricky. I mean, it comes down to, but it's like, if I was an employee somewhere and I donated to the NRA, and the owner of the company is anti-gun or something and finds out that I donated, that's, if he fires me because of that, that's clearly unethical. It's like you have all these different points of view, and there's all these political stances and all this stuff, and that's just noise, it seems like. I mean, really, at the end of the day, it's just what's right and what's wrong. Either you is, or you ain't. You
ain't.
Yeah. I mean, okay, he donated $1,000. So the only reason this is really ethical is because he took an action. If he had just had that opinion, if he had just held that opinion and not acted on it, is it still an ethical issue? I don't know. That's something that was going through my head. So,
well, I think there's a couple of different questions there. So it sounds like you're asking about, is it just him holding this view that makes it unethical? Is it his taking action? And then with respect to either of those cases, how should the company treat him? And I think there's a really important point in there, buried in there, is that it shouldn't be so simple that the company should just be able to fire you whether they agree or not with what you're doing. It seems arbitrary to say, I think this is unethical, or my company thinks this is unethical, and this particular arbitrary employee, is not acting in accordance with this, and so we're going to fire him, right? So I think there's a really important point, which is that it's not as simple as you should be able to fire an employee whether or not they're acting ethically. There's some...
You disagree with it. You
right.
With them, so
exactly.
You fire them based on that, which opens it up to...
Right. So it would go crazy. So there needs to be some other justification, if it's okay. Yes, ma'am.
I think that I would suspect that with Mozilla, it wasn't so much that it was an ethical question. It was probably that he became more of a liability than an asset at some point. Somehow, the publicity that they were getting was worse than whatever benefit he was bringing to the company. It's probably a lot more of what Mozilla's situation was.
Yeah, that's probably a lot more of the reasoning they actually used.
Probably didn't. They probably weren't looking to get rid of him because of what he did. It was just that they were tired of the publicity.
Right. And I can't imagine them saying that he shouldn't be allowed to have that view. Right? I can't imagine, I mean, really, because we're told not to hold that position, that we shouldn't let people have their views. We should let everyone have their view, and there's some justification for that. But actually, how much time do we have left?
10 hours.
20 minutes. Okay, so before we finish this, I would like to actually just apply a couple of these ethical theories that we've talked about. And so utilitarianism is really, really straightforward in this case. So you could say that the discomfort that people have, the discomfort that people who don't believe in gay marriage face is much less than the suffering that people who want to get married, who can't get married, face. I may have said that a little bit weird. Anyway, but the idea is that more good will be brought about by allowing gay couples to get married. So the suffering that people who don't believe in it go through is much less than the suffering that gay people who can't get married go through when they're not allowed to get married. And so in that way, since that's the position they could hold, then anything that supports that position, so OkCupid then would be justified, Mozilla would be justified, if you were just doing a simple utilitarian calculus. So we should do anything that supports that position. And that might be the way a utilitarian would handle the case. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Well, now, wouldn't the utilitarian position for Mozilla be, well, for the greater good, we're getting rid of this guy?
Right, but for the greater good for a lot of reasons. So the greater good for the company, for the employees in particular, because him having a job is much less good than all of the other employees having job security. And so he jeopardized their job security by damaging the image of the company in a way. And so there's a justification there, and then there's an overarching justification for society. So if Mozilla supports that, or doesn't support Proposition 8, then, and it doesn't pass, then they're bringing about the best good possible of the situation by allowing gay couples to get married, which I justified just a moment ago using utilitarianism. So there's two different ways to justify it. Justify Mozilla's action for through utilitarianism.
Let me ask you something about deontology. Deontological point of view. You just said it's will be universal. How universal is that? Like United States or like worldwide, or how universal?
It's implying that it's not implying that it'll be universally followed. The idea is that if it were universally followed, then nothing would be jeopardized. So you might be able to use it on the side of the corporation. So you could say the corporation, you can't universalize allowing, or you can't universalize corporations keeping people on who damage the image of the company, because it undermines the entire idea of a corporation, because corporations are supposed to want to make money and some of these other things that corporations do. And so them not keeping in mind or not maintaining their image or their value in the form of their mission statement or their beliefs it would undermine the idea of the corporation, I guess is how you might want to use it.
The question I've always had about utilitarianism is, it seems like that would be a problem if you tried to quantify the benefit. So let's say that you have a small town where you have 100 same-sex couples who would like to get married, and each of those 100 would be 50% happier if they could get married, but 10,000 other members of the community would be 1% happier if they could persecute those 100. So what if the 1%'s happiers of a vast majority of people who want to persecute adds up to more happiness than the justice of those 100 couples?
Right. So that's a really good question. It is difficult to quantify, but I'm just kind of arbitrarily relying on intuition here.
This is from a therapist in the room. The research is very clear that people that like persecute a lot and go out and protest and like hate mongering and stuff are actually less happier. So in that case, it would be I mean, it's unhealthy. Being hateful is not good for your body. So don't do it. Don't be a hater. That's my message.
Don't be. Haters gonna hate,
Well, if that's the case, then they have a lot more hate. So it wouldn't be 1% worse off. It'd be, 80% unhappier? Of the majority of the people. Right?
Speaking as a mathematician, I think it's nonsense talking about trying to quantify this stuff.
Yeah.
You can't quantify comparisons of different people's utilities. My utility and your utility are fundamentally different things. There is no reasonable way to compare them. And trying to say, well, I'm going to maximize the utility is pseudo-mathematics. It's nonsense.
It is pseudo-mathematics. But there is a certain way, like my brother just stated, that you can't quantify these things for every individual person, but you can quantify them in general in some degree through...
How do you quantify my satisfaction versus yours?
Well, it's not your satisfaction. It's more like the average person's satisfaction.
Well, if you're talking about averages, then you're going to have to go back to the individuals to be able to do that.
Right, but then it's just a data game. You're just trying to collect enough data to justify your quantification. So, I mean...
I think you run into the same problem with deontology, at least, let's say, with the Kantian principle of deontology, because what's important for me is not necessarily important for you. Things I value in life are things like people who will come up to me and start talking mathematics with me. Most people don't really want that. So if I say, I'm going to use the Kantian principle, and I'm going to go out there and talk mathematics with people whether they want to have that talk to them or not, I'm obeying the golden rule, I am obeying a Kantian principle, but I'm also doing something wrong when I do that.
Well, I think the key is that you wouldn't be able to, you might not be able to justify that with deontology, because if you universalize the maxim that everyone go and talk to everyone about whatever their favorite thing is, whatever they're most interested in, then you would undermine interpersonal relationships, because all I would ever talk about is math and philosophy, and people don't want to hear about that a lot of the time. And so I don't, because people don't want to hear about that a lot of the time. And so it fails. It fails the test. It fails the categorical imperative, because it undermines my ability to have interpersonal relationships. So it's not universalizable. We couldn't have everyone going and doing that kind of thing.
It's a draw.
So you're saying you can't do that?
I can't do it. Although, I do have a math joke. I have a mathematics joke that if you're really interested in mathematics, you may be the only person in the room other than me that gets it. What's the mathematician's favorite joke?
I don't hear well, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
No. What's the mathematician's favorite joke? No?
What's the mathematician's favorite joke?
Depends on the mathematician.
Let epsilon...
I have several. There are three kinds of people in the world. People who can count, people who can't.
So what is it?
Oh, no one's going to understand. Let epsilon be less than 0. This is why I can't go talk to people about math.
Nerd.
Did you get it? Tom, did you get the joke?
No, I really don't hear well.
Go over there and tell him the answer.
Okay. It's let epsilon be less than 0. Yeah?
This is similar to 1 + 1 = 3 for large values of 1, you know.
And so I guess I'll go back. Do we have any time left?
You're good.
Okay. All right. I'll go back and I'm going to try and recap briefly the argument we actually tried to make about this question, the question about Ike being, how Ike was treated by Mozilla specifically, not how he was treated in general. Because I think it's fair to say that we shouldn't go out and call people names if we disagree with them. And so the public doing that on social media probably isn't very justified. But the way you might be able to apply deontology, as I was saying earlier, is that you can't universalize Mozilla doing the opposite of what they did, allowing someone who's a detriment to the company stay in the position as a representative for the company, because it undermines the idea of a corporation. Like, the corporation has these values, they have this monetary gain, and all of that is being damaged if they allow Ike to maintain his position in the company. And so on deontology, they're supported in forcing him out or in pressuring him to leave because it's justified under the categorical imperative. It is universalizable for a corporation to treat its representatives, the representatives of the company, in that way. But that also relies on us. There's a few assumptions in that argument, and one is that the CEO is the representative of the company. And there's some corporations where the CEO isn't the representative of the company. But in this case, he was. And then there's another argument that you could make about what OkCupid did. And we tried to justify that using utilitarianism. There's a famous philosopher, John Stuart Mill, who made the argument that we have to allow free speech because it facilitates a discourse on multiple issues. And so if we fail to allow people to have their ideas and speak about what they believe, then we're losing part of the discourse. And so the good that could come about is going to be lost to a degree if we don't allow certain things to be said. And so we argued that OkCupid was justified because they were facilitating a public discourse. They weren't slandering Ike, they were simply stating a fact, and they weren't harshly boycotting, I'll say harshly boycotting Mozilla, because they were allowing Firefox users to go onto their website. And so more than anything, they were facilitating a public discourse. And so, as a utilitarian, I would argue, facilitating a public discourse about multiple issues is going to bring about the greatest good, because we'll be able to come to a conclusion about these things as a society. And so that's the idea, is that we'll have the best society if we allow free speech, because it allows us to come to conclusions about complicated issues like these.
So in essence, virtue has nothing to do with this argument.
No, we haven't used virtue at all.
And I notice it says when one is acting ethically under virtue.
Oh, did I? Is that a typo?
So how is this ethical?
Oh yeah, it's just the idea of the golden mean. That's what is ethical for virtue ethics, is just whatever isn't a vice and isn't deprivation. So you just want to have the golden mean. You want to do something in moderation. That's just what's ethical is what's moderate, which we can argue about that. Yes, maybe. Which is why I drink all the time.
How much liver damage is worth the happiness? I may have forgot what I was going to ask. Oh, OkCupid. Is that a Christian dating site, or is it just a dating site?
It's just a dating site.
Okay, that's what I couldn't remember.
The Christian dating site is christianmingle.com.
Yes, that's what I couldn't remember. And eHarmony.
Yeah, they have an undertone for sure.
So OkCupid probably is a more conservative dating site, though, if they were against.
No, they were for it.
They were for it?
Because they were
for it.
They were boycotting Mozilla. Or they were
right, okay.
letting people know that they should boycott Mozilla is what they were really doing. So that's how you can apply two of the ethical theories. Some people, I mean, I've heard people try to argue that he was acting unethically, and so he could be forced out on those grounds, but it doesn't work for all the employees. You have to have some other grounding other than just this employee is acting unethically.
Well, now I'm more curious about this, and you may or may not know this. Did he take any legal action, or did he leave it alone because he owned stock in the company, and it would have damaged him more?
I'm not sure. All the research I did was like in the middle of the
Yeah.
of the case, so it was stuff that was written about the case while it was happening. So I didn't go back and it would be, I don't know if anything was written like after the fact, like later on, but so I don't know.
Yeah, I'll have to read more about it. But I was going to say, when Chris was talking about the employee, like at Hobby Lobby, that got terminated, could possibly or did get terminated because they were a free thinker working in a Christian organization. I worked for a local hospital, and I'm not going to name it since we're recording this, but it's a Catholic hospital. That might help you. And while I was employed there, they had a email thing, and Wanda may remember this, where people could email the CEO of the hospital questions. Well, there were several atheists working at the hospital at that time. I was one of them, and there were 2 or 3 more. Well, someone wrote a letter to the CEO saying that there were atheists running rampant through the hospital, talking to patients about being non-believers. Well, I would never do that, but I wasn't in the hospital. I worked in home health. So I couldn't imagine that there was an atheist working in a Catholic hospital witnessing to patients about atheism. But I kept reading the thread to see what the CEO said, and he pretty much told them that we weren't going to go on a witch hunt, and that they needed to let it go, but that he couldn't imagine any non-believer working in the hospital and agreeing with the tenets of Christ. Well, about a week after that came out, and there were still some conversations going on, I got called into my boss's office out of the blue, and this is what she used the excuse as. She said, "We just realized that we haven't been having all the new employees agree that they believe in the tenets of Christ, and I need to ask you this." And so I said, well, and just so happened that I knew what the tenets were because I had gotten a scholarship from them, and we have to write a paper every time you apply for the scholarship on one of the tenets. There were 4 tenets, and I can't remember them off the top of my head, but one of them, reverence, integrity, all of them were things that as a ethical human being you would agree with. They wouldn't even have to be tenets of Christ. They could just be good things to live by. And so when she asked me that, she didn't say, "Do you believe in Jesus or do you believe in Christ?" She said, "Do you practice or believe in the practice of the tenets of Christ?" And I could say yes. And I did. And it may have just completely been a coincidence, but I really think that it went back to what those letters were to the CEO. I think at the next department head meeting, he said, "Y'all really need to make sure the new employees believe in these tenets of Christ and ask them about them when you're interviewing them and when you hire them. But you can't ask them if they believe in Christ or Jesus because we accept federal and state money." So I went through something like that, but I could legitimately say, yes, I did believe in those because they were good things to live by. But I didn't add that. I just said, yes, I do. And she goes, "Okay, thank you. You can go now."
Thank you. And I hope we answered that question about the Hobby Lobby employee. Is that, like Patrick was saying, it's
Did that happen, or was that a hypothetical, the Hobby Lobby employee?
No, somebody actually put that on the Facebook group.
Oh.
Right, and it's that we can't, a corporation can't fire people simply because they disagree with them. It's like there's something wrong with that, for sure. But it's because of Ike's particular position that there may be some justification we can give for the way Mozilla treated him.
My question is, as a member of this Ethics Bowl team, what attracts you as a student to this team? What benefits are there to you as a student, i.e. extracurricular, or are you getting credit for this? And what other interests? I'm still fascinated that a mathematician and philosophy go together. That seems like on the opposite end of the spectrum.
They're the same thing. I know
that explains
strange.
why I can't add.
I like philosophy and math. It is kind of difficult to see how they go together sometimes, but math is kind of like philosophy in symbols instead of in words, and so it can be kind of difficult. But a lot of philosophical arguments you can take and actually place in symbols, in like what looks like mathematical formulas. It's all logic.
I think that's art, isn't it?
Maybe art. But yeah, the Ethics Bowl, it's been a great experience. It really makes it more fluid to tackle ethical issues and to see different considerations. And there's something really good about it, which is that it forces you to see other people's perspectives. So like, I go into a case and I can only see my perspective, and I say some things that are super wrong because I don't see the other ways to see the case. And so you gain a lot of insight working with other people because everyone has a different perspective. And so you gain a lot of knowledge just working with people.
See, that sounds like sociology and psychology, not mathematics. That's the root of my question right there. Maybe. That's a good answer to my question.
Well, and it's not primarily a mathematics thing. Like most of the people doing Ethics Bowl aren't mathematicians. I think I'm the only mathematician, actually. Okay. Most of them are either philosophy or psychology or liberal arts. That's a lot of degrees. And it's extracurricular. We can get course credit for it. You have to do extra things if you want to get course credit for it. But I decided not to because I was going to satisfy my requirements taking the classes I'm already taking. And so it'll just look good to have the extracurricular. But yeah, it's both. You can do either one. You can do an independent study for the Ethics Bowl or just do it as extracurricular. No problem. You're welcome. I feel fairly normal. I get called, or last night. Yeah. I think recently I've been known as Sassy George because I took a picture, and in all the pictures I look goofy because I'm just a goofy person. But anyway, so I was in the picture and I was standing like this. I was like, I had my foot turned to the side and I was like leaning back, and I felt like I looked sassy.
I was just going to ask you if you'd come back later in the year and talk to us more about philosophy.
Yes, I would love to.
Thank you.
I love talking about
And then we
philosophy.
might invite you back to talk about mathematics too, but we'll have to eat a lot of Wheaties. We'll have to eat a lot of Wheaties and...
Oh, there is one more thing I'd like to say. Is that we're always trying to fundraise for the Ethics Bowl. And on the back of all the handouts, there's a link, or there's a URL to the Ethics Bowl website, or the Ethics Bowl page on UALR's website. And from there, there's a link to our fundraising website. So if anyone would like to give funds or post on Facebook that we're trying to get funding, I would very much appreciate it. It's fine if not, but I just throwing it out there that we're always doing fundraising.
Would you like to know the atheist's favorite joke?
Yes.
Are you sure?
No.
That's not it, no. For Episcopalians to be less than zero.
Oh. Wait, but Episcopalians are fairly progressive, aren't they?
They are Arkansas. It depends on the Senate. Depends on the state that you're in.
It started with an E, okay?
Oh. For Episcopalians to be less than zero. Ahaha.
Typical reaction from a mathematician.
I can't believe you made that joke. All right. Thank you all very much.